My sister-in-law smiled at me across the dinner table like she was doing me a kindness. It's just going to be immediate family this year, Corey, you understand. My brother nodded along without looking up from his fork. My mother studied her water glass. My father reached for the bread. Nobody said a word to correct her. I folded my napkin into a neat square, said of course, told them I had an early morning. Before I tell you what happened 4 days later, when my brother sent me a payment request for the exact trip I'd just been written out of. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you've ever watched someone quietly redraw the lines of family until you're standing on the outside of them, you already know what I carried home that night. My name is Corinna. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a senior financial advisor at a mid-sized wealth management firm, which means I spend my days helping other people make careful, clear-headed decisions about the things they've built. The irony of that did not escape me when I finally sat down and ran the numbers on my own life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up in a mid-sized town in Ohio, the older of 2 kids by 3 years. My brother Damien came along when I was 3, and from the outside, we probably looked like a normal, functional family. 2 parents who stayed married, a house with a finished basement, holidays that went mostly without incident. The texture, though, was more complicated than the surface, and I think I knew that before I had words for it. My mother loved us both, I've never doubted that. But there was a consistent, quiet tilt in how she held us, the way a house can be level on the outside, and still have one wall that's slightly off plumb. When I brought home straight A's, she said I was so capable. When Damien's junior soccer team made regionals, she put the photo on the refrigerator for 4 months and cried at the pizza party. I understood early that capable was a word reserved for children, who were expected to manage themselves. I managed myself accordingly. I worked through high school, babysat, tutored, waitressed at a diner my junior and senior years. I got a partial scholarship to a state school and covered the rest with a second job. I graduated with a finance degree, $4,000 in credit card debt, and the kind of determination that comes from never having a safety net close enough to see. My brother went to a private college, fully funded, by way of a joint account I learned about only accidentally. Years later, he graduated with a car and a plan to open a food truck. I was 25 when he asked me to help fund it. $22,000. He needed it to bridge the gap between his bank approval and the actual cost of equipment and startup supplies. He'd pay me back in 18 months, he said, less if the truck took off fast. I said yes without hesitating. Because he was my brother, and because I'd just been promoted, and because I'd spent my whole life believing that if I was the one who could help, I was the one who should. The food truck lasted 11 months. He called me when he was closing it down, and I told him it was okay, that first businesses were hard, that I believed in him. What I didn't say, what I stored neatly in the part of myself I had always been good at keeping organized, was that $22,000 was still sitting between us, unremarked on, unrepaid. Over the next several years I watched my brother cycle through 2 more ventures while I climbed. Senior associate, associate advisor, senior advisor before 30. I managed portfolios for clients who trusted me with the kind of money that demands real care, and I was good at it, careful and consistent, attentive to risk in a way that came from growing up without the luxury of ignoring it. I was significantly less careful when it came to my family. The car loan was 28. Damien had burned through 2 vehicles in 3 years and landed on a payment he couldn't sustain. And he called me from a parking lot sounding desperate. And I transferred $11,500 and told him we could work out the details later. He said he'd send something every month. He sent $200 in February of the following year, and nothing after. When Damien got engaged, he called me 3 days after the proposal, still sheepish about it, to tell me he'd chosen a ring he couldn't quite afford. He needed $6,000, just until the next commission check cleared. I sent it. When my parents told me they needed a real vacation, because my mother's back was bad, and they were both exhausted, I covered $4,200 of a week in Florida. When my brother's transmission blew, and my parents had a rough month the same February, I handled both. Smaller things, one after another, adding up in a spreadsheet I kept out of professional habit, without ever actually looking at the total. And then, the year Damien married Phoebe, I started contributing to the lake house. It had been my family's summer anchor for years, a 2-bedroom cabin on a small lake in Michigan, rented from the same owner every July. When he offered to sell it at a price my parents could almost make work, my father called and asked if I could help carry 40% of the ongoing costs. Damien was between jobs. My mother's back wasn't good enough for the side work she usually picked up. I said yes. I was proud that I could. For 4 years, I sent $2,160 every month. I visited twice each summer, usually for a long weekend, working around client schedules and fiscal deadlines. I didn't begrudge the arrangement. I told myself that contributing was its own kind of belonging. Phoebe came into the family the same year the lake payment started, and she arrived the way a current arrives. Gradual, pervasive, comprehensive. She had a large family of her own, close and loud and self-certain, and she had the particular confidence of someone who had always known exactly where she stood in every room. She was never unkind to me. She was something harder to navigate. The kind of warm that keeps a careful distance. The kind of welcoming that never quite opens the door. Small things shifted. The family group chat, which Phoebe now managed, had planning conversations that happened just before I was added. Holiday logistics got finalized in calls I wasn't on. I'd ask about a date and be told, with gentle reasonableness, that it had already come together. There was always a plausible explanation. There was never any acknowledgement that a shape was forming. The spring before that dinner, my mother mentioned the lake trip almost in passing. Damien and Phoebe want to do the full 2 weeks this year. I asked which weekends might work for me to join, and there was a pause I noticed and did not name. We'll sort out the details closer to summer. I let it go. That was something I had gotten good at. I arrived at my parents' house on a Sunday in late May, with a good bottle of wine and the specific hopefulness of someone who is still, despite evidence, trying to believe in something. Dinner was my mother's baked chicken, same recipe since I was 7. Damien and Phoebe sat across from me. My father was at the head of the table, quieter than usual. It all felt almost normal right up until I asked about the July dates. I've got 2 weeks I can work around, I said. I was thinking I'd come up for the first weekend and maybe the last. It'd be good to actually overlap with everyone for a stretch. Phoebe's smile arrived just before her words. Oh, that's so sweet of you. Actually, this year we really want to keep it contained, just immediate family. Damien's parents and mine, my sister and her husband. It's getting kind of unwieldy otherwise, and we want it to feel more intimate. I looked at my brother. He was looking at his chicken. Yeah, he said to his plate. We figured we'd simplify this year. I want to tell you that what moved through me in that moment was clean anger. But it wasn't. It was something older and slower. Something that recognized the shape of what was happening before my brain had fully processed the words. Phoebe's sister's husband, a man I had met exactly twice, who I would struggle to describe beyond tallish, pleasant handshake, was immediate family. Damien's actual sister, the person who had been sending monthly payments for this cabin for 4 years, was not immediate enough to qualify. I looked at my father. He was reaching for the salt. I looked at my mother. She had developed a sudden interest in the window above the sink. Oh, I said. I kept my voice even. I had years of practice keeping my voice even, of course I understand. I finished my wine, and ate my dinner, and made 20 minutes of conversation about things that didn't matter. When I left, my mother held on at the door a beat longer than usual, which was the closest she knew how to come to saying something she didn't have words for. I drove home in the dark and let myself into my apartment, and sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, which I hadn't done since I was a teenager. And I stayed there until my legs went numb. Immediate family. The phrase cycling, until it stopped sounding like language and started sounding like what it was. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep much the following night either. I went to work and sat across from clients and gave them sound, careful counsel about protecting what they'd built, and I drove home and sat with the particular quiet of someone who is deciding something without knowing yet what the decision is. It was Keely who finally said something. She had been my closest colleague for 3 years. She ran the operations side of our practice and had a talent for noticing things I didn't announce. She found me at my desk on a Thursday at 7:30, the office long empty, and stood in the doorway with her coat still on and said, "Something happened." I told her, all of it, the smile, the word intimate, the years of Phoebe's careful, pleasant redrawing, the way my brother had looked at his plate. She sat down across from me, was quiet for a moment, then, "How much have you actually put into this family?" I said I didn't know the exact total. She said, "Go find out." I pulled up the records I kept for my accountant, the food truck loan, Damien's car, the engagement ring bridge, my parents' Florida trip, 4 years of lake house payments at 40%, the smaller things I'd tracked without ever looking at the sum. I added for a long time. The number, when I finally had it, was $114,000. I said it out loud in my empty office. $114,000, I texted it to Keely. Her reply came in under a minute, "And you're not immediate family." I sat with that for a long time. 4 days after the dinner at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning, my brother sent me a payment request. The note read, "Hey, can you cover the lake house deposit this year? $3,500. We'll settle like always at end of summer. Thanks." I looked at that message. Then I went into our text thread, found the screenshot I'd taken the week before, his own words confirming the trip was just immediate family, and I attached it to my reply. "Hi, quick note, you mentioned last month the trip was for immediate family only, and I totally respect that. I'm going to apply the same logic on my end. Doesn't feel right to fund something I'm not part of. Hope the deposit comes together. Love you." Request declined. I put my phone face down and went back to my client files. By noon I had 11 missed calls. Damien called 4 times with no voicemail. My mother left a message that was mostly quiet and then, "Corey, please just call me." Phoebe sent 3 paragraphs I read once. My father called once and left a voicemail that said, "I don't know exactly what's happening, but I'd like to talk to you." He was the only one I called back that night, because his message had sounded more bewildered than accusatory. And because some part of me still needed to know he was in there, my actual father, underneath the man who had reached for the salt. He answered on the first ring. I told him what I'd told myself all week, said plainly. She used the words immediate family to tell me I wasn't included. 4 days later his son asked me to pay for the trip. Both of those things happened. I hadn't invented them. My father was quiet for a moment, then he said, the deposit is due by Friday. I understood something clearly then. Something I think I'd understood for a long time without naming it. The call was not about me. The call was about the deposit. Those were not the same conversation, and I was done pretending they were. I love you, Dad, I said. I really do. But I've been paying for a seat at a table I'm not welcome at. That's not a punishment on my end. It's just finally reading the situation correctly. He said he understood. I'm not sure he did, but he didn't argue. Damien came to my door 2 days later, alone, which surprised me. He looked tired in a different way than usual. I made coffee and we sat at my kitchen table like we were attempting to be ordinary. He started with the closest thing he had to an apology. Phoebe didn't mean it the way it sounded. She said I wasn't immediate family, I said, in front of you and Mom and Dad, and no one at that table disagreed. It's complicated with her family's traditions. Damien. I said his name quietly. I've been sending money for this lake house every month for 4 years. I covered your car, part of your ring, the food truck, the business after that, various other things. When I sat down and actually looked at it, the number was $114,000 over 6 years. And last month I was told I'm not immediate enough to attend. He went still. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad, I said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what the math looks like from my side. I have been paying for a place in this family for a long time, and now I know what that place actually was. He looked at the table for a long time. Then, in a voice that reminded me of the boy who used to knock on my door during thunderstorms. Because I was the older one, and that used to mean something. I didn't know it had gotten to that number. I know, I said. That's what I'm telling you. We sat with that quietly. He didn't ask for the deposit again. He didn't try to argue me back into the trip. He just sat there. And I sat there. And the coffee went cold between us, and something passed between us that I don't quite have the word for. Something that was not resolution but was at least honesty, which is where resolution has to begin. He hugged me when he left. He hadn't done that in years. Phoebe texted the following week, more careful this time, less defended. She apologized for the phrasing, said it hadn't come out the way she intended, said she hoped we could find our way forward. I replied that I appreciated it and left it there. I wasn't ready to extend more than that, and I was done performing warmth I hadn't gotten to yet. My mother and I talked on a Tuesday night, 2 hours on the phone. She did something she hadn't done in a long time. She stayed. She told me she'd seen the tilt, had seen for years the difference in how she'd held Damien and me, and hadn't known how to stop something once it had started. She cried. I cried. It was not a repair, not entirely, but it was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, and I let it mean what it meant. I did not resume the lake house payments. That phone call with my mother was real, and I held it carefully, but I had also spent a long time buying a place at a table where I was always, somehow, just slightly in the way. Some things can be forgiven without being refinanced. That distinction matters, and it took me years to understand it. The summer came and went without me at the lake, for the first time in 4 years. I took the money I would have sent and spent a long weekend in Vermont with Keely and 2 other friends, hiking and eating badly and laughing until everything hurt. I did not miss the cabin. I missed the idea of the cabin, which turned out to be a smaller grief than I'd expected, and a more honest one. By fall, things had shifted in small but real ways. Damien and I started texting again. Nothing heavy, just the ordinary exchange of 2 siblings who had remembered they existed to each other. He and Phoebe came to my birthday dinner in September, and she was warmer than she'd ever been, the specific warmth of someone who has made a decision to try. I appreciated it. I didn't fully trust it yet. Both of those things seemed true and fair. My mother and I built a rhythm of Sunday calls that neither of us had managed before. My father and I went to a baseball game in October, just the 2 of us, and for 3 hours we were just 2 people watching baseball in the fall, and that was enough, and I let it be. The money I'd been sending to the lake house, I redirected partly into a retirement contribution I'd been underfunding for too long, and partly into a small scholarship fund I established at my old state university in November. For first-generation students studying business or finance. Kids who would show up to their first interviews in second-hand blazers, working 2 jobs, used to being called capable in the particular tone that means you're on your own. I wanted to put something real in their direction. I thought about what it would have meant to me at 22. To know that someone who'd already walked the road was watching for you. The lake house sold in the spring. My parents couldn't carry it without my share, and Damien's contributions had always been more theoretical than actual. I don't know exactly what that cost them. I know what 4 years of payments had cost me, and I know what the month I stopped paying cost me, which was considerably less. Here is what I know now. Sitting where I'm sitting. Love is not the same thing as accommodation. Showing up financially is not the same thing as being included. And the people who benefit most from your generosity are not always the ones positioned to recognize what it costs. I spent a long time funding my own exclusion and calling it family loyalty. Setting that payment request aside was the first time in years I applied to my own life, the same principle I applied to my clients every day. Stop putting resources into arrangements that return nothing on the investment. If you're listening to this tonight and you recognize something in it, the quiet labor of being the capable one, the way you keep showing up for people who have come to expect your arrival without seeing it, I want to say this directly to you. You are not required to keep financing your own erasure. Setting a limit is not abandonment. Asking to be seen is not a transaction. And the people who confuse your boundaries with betrayal are almost always the ones who benefited most from you not having any. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to reset the terms with someone in your family? What finally made it clear? I read every single one, and whatever you're carrying tonight, I promise you are not carrying it alone.